Hello, this is Chris Gannon. I want to talk about creating dynamic points, SVG points. So you can actually build dynamic shapes in the browser using native functionality called create SVG point. In Illustrator, just for a minute, just to show you what I mean, we'll create a polyline by drawing that, and so what we're going to do in the browser is see each of these anchor points has an X position and a Y position, and inside the polyline there's a points attribute, and points attribute is describes these points. So it has a pair, an X and a Y value, X and Y value, X and Y value, X and Y value. Now we could draw something in Illustrator and then bring it into the browser, but it's much more fun to actually create the whole thing in the browser. So let's slip over to CodePen. Let's get started. Okay, so I've done a little bit of a setup here. I've created an empty SVG tag, given it an ID of main SVG, given it its namespace, and just given it a view box so that it scales up and down. And I've created an empty polyline tag with just an ID. In the CSS, I'm just styling it, and in the JS, I'm just making it visible to stop a flash of unstyled SVG. This is just bit of things I always do, and then a couple of little shortcuts to query selector and query selector all, and then a couple of references to the main SVG and the polyline. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a nice straight line, and then we're going to animate those points. I'll show you what we mean. So I'm just going to create sort of an arbitrary number of points. So I'm going to say maybe num points equals, let's say 80. I'm just pulling these numbers sort of out of a hat really. Okay, so we're just going to have a loop through, and we're going to use create SVG point. First of all, I'm going to write a function, and we're going to say create shape. Actually, create line, just because it's a bit more descriptive. And we're going to do we should probably do let I equals 0. I is less than num points. I plus, plus. Okay. Now the create SVG points is a method of the SVG, which is why we've created a reference to it. So what we can say is we can say let p equal main SVG dot create SVG point. Okay, and that basically creates an empty SVG point. We can have a look in the console here. Let's clear that. So we can say console.log p, and then we'll call that function create line. Oops. Let's see what it says. Okay, so we've got an empty object with an X and a Y of 0, 0, and it's native code. This is actually slightly different from a normal JavaScript object. So that's fine, but what we can do, we can say, so we could then set p, p.x, p.y, and all that sort of thing, and then add it to the polyline. But what we can do is we can sort of squash all that down a little bit using the append item method, which is a method of the poly.points object. So we can do that. So let's do that. So we're going to say, let me just cut that for a sec. We're going to say, so poly, which is the line, and we say its points, which is, so actually let me just show you. Let me just turn this off for us. Oops. Just turn this off for a sec. So normally you would already have a sort of a pre-written points attribute for the polyline. So you would have something like points equal, and then you would have the first point would be, let's say, 0 for the x and 200 for the y, and then 100 for the next point on the x and 200 for the y, and you'll be able to see a line starting to grow down here, and then 200 for the x, 200 for the y, and then 300 for the x, 300 for the 200 for the y. And see, this line's growing, and if we want it to sort of start to bend down, we'd say 400 for the x and 400 for the y, and it's suddenly going to sort of start going down. And that's basically how you draw points, but we're going to do that dynamically, and this is how you do it. P equals poly.points, and we can use the .append item, and then we can paste in our newly created SVG point. Let's remove that semicolon, and so now we can call that. So we want to draw a straight line in this particular demo. So let's do that. So we can start. Don't forget we're in a loop here, so we can say p.x equals, and we're going to sort of we're going to evenly space them by, I don't know, what have we got, 80, and we've got 800. So we'll evenly space them by 10. So we can say I times 10. So each x position will be, so 0 times 10, and then 1 times 10, 2 times 10, 3 times 10, and then p dot y, the y position, because it's a straight line, it will always be, let's say we're going to put it down at 300. Okay, there's our line. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to animate it, and this is where the power comes in, because I mean, in this demo we're just going to be animating a straight line, but there's all sorts of things you can do with polygons and polylines to make some really cool effects. But I just want to show you how we can animate the points in a polyline. Okay, we're going to start a timeline. So let timeline equals gsat.timeline, and we're going to use the stagger feature because the points are an array of points. So we can say timeline.to, and we can talk directly to the poly.points, and we can say we're just going to animate the y position. So it's we're going to sort of create a wave that goes up and down. So the wave and we're going to do a relative animation from its current position. So its current position is y, is 300. And we're going to say just plus equals, I don't know, 60. So at the moment, they all just went down by 60 at the same time. But we're going to use the stagger function, stagger, and there's the each property of that, and this is the delay between each animation, each plus 60 animation, and we'll do something like small, like 0.009 or something like that, and immediately you can see that sort of going down in a sort of a wave. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to go up and down. So inside the stagger, we can put in repeat so that it repeats forever. Whoops. So it repeats forever. Okay, so now we've got it repeating forever. And because we haven't declared an ease for either the forward animation or the repeat or the repeating animation, it's basically doing its animation and then going back to the start and doing the animation again. So we want it to yo-yo, so we're going to say yo-yo is true. So we're starting to get a sort of a nice wave, but the problem now is we've got this sort of like this little peak that's going along, and that's because of the ease that we're using. Now when you're doing sort of a nice sort of a liquidy type wave. Liquid, when it's going up and down, tends to ease in and out. So to get a sort of a nice natural motion. So outside of this stagger, we're going to say ease is sine dot in out. And that is looking nice. Tell you what we're going to do now. I think well, let's do some. Let's draw. Let's put a little arrowhead on it, because that might be quite cool actually. And I'm actually going to draw this just because it's probably easier. So I'm just going to nip over to Illustrator and just get rid of that. And in fact, I think let me just draw one. So I'm going to do a quick square, turn it on its, just rotate it 45 degrees, and then cut those corners, get rid of that, and there's the end of your arrowhead. And I'm going to make it some nicer values. So I'll make this like 35, and this, I don't know, 50 or something like that. There you go, nice arrowhead. Now, when you use so a marker is it's another native SVG tag, and it allows you to place graphics at the beginning, middle, or the end of a path or a polyline. And so we're going to put an arrowhead at the at one end of our nice undulating line. If I wanted to have this positioned in a specific place on the canvas, I would draw a box behind it, put that to the back. Let's just make that a different colour. So I need to remove that fill. I don't need a fill on that arrowhead, and then I would copy both of these over and export them so that this arrowhead was always in the middle. As it is, I don't need to do that. In fact, I don't want to do that, because marker graphics should always be registered at the top left. But there's a quick way of doing this, and that is literally, doesn't matter where it is, you just copy it onto your clipboard and paste it. Well, we can paste it straight into CodePen actually, and then just remove the bits that we don't want. So let's just nip back over to CodePen. I'm just going to paste this in here and just take the bits I want. So this is the gubbins that I've just pasted from Illustrator, and I'm just going to take, I'm going to call this ID equals arrowhead, and I'm just going to take that polyline, copy, and then just undo it, so get rid of it, and then I'm going to put this inside here. Now that in itself is not going to do anything, because we need to put it inside a marker tag. And the way you do that is, what I tend to do with markers is I tend to put things like that aren't sort of code that I reference. I put them inside the definitions tag, and this is something that you can do inside SVG, and it puts it in the shadow DOM, and it means it's sort of it's like a sort of a green room, if you like. It's sort of like where the actors wait in the definitions tag in the green room, and you can call on them and put them on the stage. So anything outside of the defs tag is the stage. Okay, so we're going to take the polyline, and we're going to open up a marker tag. So we're going to say marker, and we'll give it an ID equals arrow, and we're going to give it a width and a height, and that's the width and the height of the actual graphic, which I seem to recall was 30, and the height was 50. Okay, let me just go and check that is the case. Let me just nip over to Illustrator and have a little look up here. What was it? I know it's 35 by 50. Okay, so let's go back to Right, so it was 35 by 50. So this is just a marker, remember. And markers need a view box. So we'll put in a view box. Oops, can't type. View box equals, and it's similar to your SVG view box, so it's again 35 by 50. There's another width and height. I think you need these. I always seem to use them. Marker width equals 35 and marker height equals 50. We're going to use the local space called marker units, which is what we have to include this as well, equals, and it's user space on use. It goes a bit crazy if you don't use that. Okay, so that's the first part of the marker tag. We're just going to close it, and then we're going to paste in our arrowhead graphic. Now, nothing's happening at the moment. We need to add it to the polyline, and we can do that by saying inside the polyline tag we can say marker. Now there are three different ways of doing it. You can either say marker start, marker middle, and marker end, I think, something like that. And we're going to just put it. We'll say marker start, so it's going to be on this end here, this beginning bit here, and that equals URL open brackets hash, and then we're going to reference the marker's ID, which is arrow, and hopefully that should magically appear on there. I think we should probably just quickly style that, and I think we'll just borrow the styling from the actual polyline itself, because it's, you know, it's an arrowhead and it should be the same. So we'll call that so arrow head, because that's the polyline. We're going to style the polyline. So we've got the arrowhead in. Slight problem, and that is it needs some sort of offsetting a little bit, because it's not quite right, is it? So there are attributes we can use for that. Let's go back into the marker tag, and we can say the reference x and the reference y. So that's reference x equals, and this is like an offset, so you can move it. So actually it's probably all right actually. Let's do the reference y first, because the reference y is the thing that's wrong. It's too far down. Now let me do that properly. Reference y equals, now we need to move it back up minus probably about half its height. So if we do 25, there you go, look, it's sort of moved it up a little bit. And in fact, we probably could do a little bit with the reference x as well. See, it's not quite sort of right at the end, so we'll do that. We'll stick a reference x in as well, just to move it, to offset it a little. So reference x equals, and it's really going to be a question of, we need to go like minus about 3. So we'll say 3, and there we are. Okay, so that's kind of all right, but we can improve that a bit more. So if there was an arrowhead on the end of this, I would imagine that it would be pointing the way the wave was going, and we can do that. We can do that quite easily actually. We can say orient, so the way it orients equals, now this can either be a number, so we can either say 90 degrees. Notice that it's now pointing 90 degrees upwards, or any value between 180 or whatever. But it's still sort of fairly static. What we can do is we can actually instead put auto in there, so it'll jump back to its native orientation, and now it follows the angle they're pointing at, and points the arrow or the marker in that position too. So that's looking pretty cool. I'm quite pleased with that. Now at this stage of when I'm building things, I kind of think, ooh, that's quite nice. Well, let's actually make it into something like sort of, you know, something pretty basically. And so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put another line in here. It's going to have a wave that's out of sync by one sort of wave length. I'll show you. So we're just gonna duplicate everything. So we're gonna do another polyline. We'll call that poly2, and we'll create line in here. So over in the JS panel, we'll do let p. We'll call it p2, or let's just create a reference to that poly2. Oh look, it's gone all crazy. Look. So we're going to say poly2. So we're now referencing that. Oh, that's quite pretty, isn't it? Well, this is the reason why I wanted to do this demo. There's so many cool things you can do. Once you've got animating points on the screen, you can go absolutely nuts, basically, with creating all these beautiful polygons with staggered point positions and stuff, and that's very nice. Okay, so we've got poly2, we've got p2, and that's create. Oh, we need to do so. That's creating them on poly2. So we've got p. That's setting the x and y positions for the first p. Let's copy these over and say p2. Oops, p2. I tell you what, we'll push this down by, we'll set this one down by 60 so that it's below it, and we just need to style that as well. So in the CSS we'll say it's poly2, so that should give it its style as well. And now we can see that it's there, but it's not animating yet. We can do that. So to this, inside this timeline here, we just duplicate that over, and we'll say poly2. Now that's going to be a duplicate of the. That's going to be exactly the same animation, but you notice nothing's actually happened. And the reason nothing's happened is because this animation we never get past this animation. This is basically sitting there looping all the time. So it plays its animation, then loops back to the beginning, loops back to the beginning, loops back to the beginning. This one never ever gets a chance to play. But what we can do is in here we can say, I want you to start at 0. So now both of these animations are happening at the same time. Now, I mean, that looks all right, but like I said a few minutes ago, I would like this to be slightly offset. So we can do that. We can say, instead of starting at 0, i.e. starting at exactly the same time as this first animation, literally just start at 0.1 seconds, and that will immediately give that a much more natural sort of feel. And again, that's looking all right. You could get some nice wave effects going on here. But what I'd like to do is have them sort of crossing over, so it almost looks like they're in a sort of a spiral, like a helix sort of thing. So instead of them both animating on the Y position plus 60 and then back to their original position, then plus 60 and back, this one's going to be minus 60. And suddenly we're starting to get some really, really nice motion going. And you know what? I think I'm actually quite happy with that. All I'm going to do now, I think, is just change a little bit of the style. I think I'm going to change this. I'm looking for just go for a bit of a nicer color. So in the CSS, I'm going to change this to green. Oh, green yellow. We'll go for green yellow, and we'll change this to like a grey, like a sort of a grey color. Look at that. Oh, that looks nice. And I think, I tell you what, why don't we add in, instead of, we'll do a stroke dash array, which makes it dotted, yeah. and we'll do something like, I don't know, 24,12. So that's basically going to be, oh, look at that. And then we'll just make it, so this is the gap. So there's a space of 12 between each one. Each sort of dot segment is 24 pixels, I presume, and there's a space of 12 between them. You could actually go. You can keep adding to these, by the way. So you can have the first dot is 24 wide with a space of 12, and then you can do another set of dots, which is this next one is 6 wide, and it has a gap of 12, and then you start 12, and then you start getting these really kind of interesting sort of Morse code style sort of dotted lines. So you can go crazy. You can just keep adding to those. If you want 5, 12, 1, 2, 123, 5, you're going to start getting, oh, actually, oh, that's all right. Anyway, so let's just go back to something like 12. There you go. That'd be quite nice, isn't it? I think we're just going to make this a bit fatter as well. So we'll change that to 5. And you know what? I actually think that the arrowhead probably shouldn't be dotted. I don't know. I'm not sure if that looks. So that's a stroke dash array equals 0 for the arrowhead. Yeah, I think that looks nicer, doesn't it? And finally, I think what we'll do. Just add a little bit more depth, because I'm all about the extra little bits and pieces. Is poly2, we'll just set the opacity down to like 0.3. See how that looks. Not bad. I think we could probably animate. Actually, yeah, let's do that. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to animate this one. Oh no, that's not going to work, is it? Because I'm not actually accessing the graphics. What I was going to do was animate the line. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we'll do that. So we're going to add to this animation here, and we're going to make the first one animate from half opacity to full opacity, and then the other one from full opacity to half opacity, and hopefully that will add more depth and make it look like they're much more like they're sort of rolling over each other, like sort of DNA style. Do you know what? I might just see. I might just do a separate animation. So we'll call this let. We'll call it a fade timeline equals a gsat.timeline. I don't know if this is going to work, by the way. But we'll try it. So fade timeline dot from to, and so we're going to say, so poly, that's the first line, the first animating line, and it's going to go from whoops, I thought I was going to autocomplete there. For opacity from 0.2, we'll do that from. And then that's going to go to opacity of 1. And we'll repeat that forever, and we'll yo-yo that true as well. So that goes up and down. So hopefully we'll see that now doing what we want. So that's cool. And then we're going to do the same thing for this one, for poly 2, except this one's going to go from 1 to 0.2. Technically, we don't actually have to go from 2 in this particular one, because it already is at opacity 1. So we could actually just say 2. In fact, let's be a bit clearer about this. Well, let's be a bit more correct about this. Because it's already at opacity 1, we don't need to go from 2, because it's already at. We don't need to set it to start opacity, because we already know it. So we could actually just do, 2, get rid of that one, to opacity 2, and that's going to loop as well. And then don't forget that we need to set this one to the beginning And there we go. That already looks like it's sort of, this one's jumping over the top. That looks cool. I'm really pleased with that. And there you have it. So we've created a pretty cool animation using SVG, create SVG points. We added a load of points to a polyline points object using append item. So we appended all the points using append item, and then we animated them, the poly.points, using Greensock, and we've come up with this cool effect. I hope you like this, and I'll see you in another video. Cheers.